Welcome to You Don't Know Ball. Today, we are going to be doing team previews for all teams in the NFC East. We are going to go over quickly their free agency, their draft, and then their overall narrative or storyline for the year. If you don't know ball, want to know ball, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, let us know in the comments what you think the narrative for each team in the NFC East is. Dobbs, we'll start it off right now with the Dallas Cowboys. If we take a look at their free agency, there's really not much. There is really not much. They brought back Zeke Elliott. They signed Royce Freeman. They signed Eric Kendricks. And then everything else is re-signing. Jerry Jones said they're all in. So our narrative is, were they really all in?
I mean, it's a very important question, isn't it, Hunter? Because I think, and again, it's not even about look. Let's disregard the draft.
Well, I guess that's I guess that's the question. Is that question even important? Were they really all in? Because Jerry Jones, what is he doing?
See, and here's my big thing, Hunter. I think you'll agree with this too. I think we're started to really become a problem, and Cowboys fans would agree too. I think a majority of Cowboys fans would be on the same. And maybe, and look, Cowboys fans, you probably have gotten back to the side of you went like this. You were with me, and then now you're back over here because you want to be optimistic, and I can't blame you, right? The season's going to start. You want to be optimistic. You want to, right? It's Super Bowl or bust. I don't blame you for being back over here, but I think you're with me here at a point. And what this side over here is right. Why in the world is Mike McCarthy still the coach of this team? And I think it really said a lot when Mike McCarthy got another chance, because we go over the tenure here, Hunter, of Mike McCarthy, right? Let's start, right? We remember when he first got the job, the joke about how he lied to Jerry Jones, about watching all the plays and all those things. We're already off to a very interesting, unorthodox start. If you remember that, like however, 4 years ago, however long ago that was, time flies. But, and so then we get into an era of just same old Cowboys, right? Like we thought with the Mike McCarthy era, at least me personally, I thought we were going to at least start seeing the Cowboys lose in the NFC Championship, losing Super Bowls. Even if they were to lose, we thought he was going to get them at least over the NFC hump. Well, that hasn't even happened once. And I think with how talented that this team is, you look at what you signed Mike McCarthy up for, because Jason Garrett was already doing what Mike McCarthy was doing. I mean, there really isn't, maybe Mike McCarthy has a better regular season record, but as we always say, it's Super Bowl bust. Who gives a shit about any of that other stuff that doesn't matter? You either get to the playoffs or you didn't. The record doesn't mean anything. Once you get there, it really doesn't. So Jason Garrett was doing the same exact thing Mike McCarthy's been doing, and you decided to hold on to him again. I just feel like it sends the wrong message to the fans more than anything, like we already just said, especially when you say that we're all in. What do you mean by all in? All in on selling tickets, Jerry, or all in on going to the Super Bowl and winning it again? Well, right? I mean, I'm just calling it how it is.
They've been kind of like the Bills. They've been regular season warriors, but the Bills have actually done something in the playoffs. And when you look at their draft, I mean, I don't mind the Tyler Guyton pick. I kind of trust the Cowboys to kind of churn out O-linemen. That's kind of what they've been known for. And, Cooper Beebe is a safe pick at guard. But when you look at their draft and you look at free agency and how much they've lost, I mean, they have to re-sign Dak, Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb. And I feel like the height of what this roster was is kind of gone. Like, you're not getting that back, especially with the extensions and especially with the questions around Dak. I mean, I think Dak probably ends up as the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, but of the future. But Ezekiel Elliott, Rico Dowdle, and Deuce Vaughn is your running back room. You have CeeDee Lamb, an older Brandon Cooks, and then Jalen Tolbert at your wide receiver 3. Jake Ferguson is a good tight end, and then you obviously your line you're developing. But with that being said, they're not going farther than they were last year. They're not better than they were last year, and in my opinion, your time is running out. Dan Quinn made that defense what it was.
That's what I was really about to say. Is the biggest problem that we're dealing with here now, if you're a Cowboys fan, is that the guy who was really giving the team the identity that they had, and yes, okay, let me not short them. This offense has been very productive in the regular season under Mike McCarthy, but again, not when it matters. And you know what? Look, you could say the same thing about Dan Quinn, but I think, as we always say, and it still is very true, you need to have a good defense to win championships. You have to have a guy who can put together defensive championship game plans, as we've seen, like Steve Spagnuolo with the Chiefs. And that's what the Cowboys had in Dan Quinn. Now you're not sure if you have that anymore. I think my big thing too is, there's a lot of things we could talk about with the Cowboys, but you already touched on the biggest thing. I don't think a lot of people are really thinking, Hunter, about how much money the Cowboys are going to be like tossing out here over the next couple of years. Namely, more than anything, Micah Parsons can walk in Jerry's office and demand whatever he wants. What Micah Parsons does, there's no other defensive player in the league that does it at the same key that Micah Parsons does and the versatility he has. I mean, he can truly demand whatever he wants at this point. And like you said, we're not getting better, we're getting worse. And then we're going to be tossing out more money. I think, side note too, very side note, but something that also is also kind of concerning for the Cowboys. Mozzie Smith already falling down as a backup on the depth chart after being drafted with that first round pick last year. That's not a good sight. There's a lot of things from the Cowboys from the perspective, like you were saying. Did they progress or did they regress? It feels like we're leaning towards a slight regress. But for a team that's all in, that has to be somewhat concerning as a fan.
Well, I think the big thing, Dobbs, before we move on, is it's okay to take a step back. Like, it's okay to do what the Bills did to kind of rebuild, regroup. But what is the rebuild, regroup here? Like, there is no direction. Like, what is the rebuild, regroup? The Bills got younger.
I didn't even talk about CeeDee Lamb's contract. I didn't even. I glazed over. We glazed over a lot of stuff we could have talked about. Like, that's the problem with the Cowboys is they are going to be legitimately tossing out so much premium money that by the time that premium money is spent, where's the rest allocated into? Because a lot of the homegrown guys that a lot of teams have, the Cowboys don't really have a lot of those. And the ones that they do have that have been playing good ball, like Osa, like these guys like that. Are you going to be able to pay them when you have to pay Micah and CD? I mean, it's just, there's a lot of questions the Cowboys have got to answer going forward.
I mean, I guess it's like technically like a good problem to have. I don't think they're handling it the right way though, because I guess my thing is like the Cowboys have been a very, very good like drafting team. Like the Cowboys have drafted like very, very well for quite a while now. But I feel like Micah and CD should have been extended as soon as you could. You know what I'm saying? Like the minute they are able for an extension, you do that because CD is going to be the second highest paid wide receiver in football. Like he is. Justin Jefferson, right? Like he statistically was one of the best receivers in the league last year. So he's not going to get Justin Jefferson money, but I mean, he should be the second highest paid.
But that's what's scary though, is he probably, right, no agent, I don't believe, or no team is gonna be able to justify that Justin Jefferson money. But 1 or 2 M's off of that Justin Jefferson money, I think you could walk in there and request. And that's what's scary about the Cowboys being the Cowboys, is you got to pay that money. Because if not, you just develop them to send him to somebody else. And there's no point in that. And you spent that first round pick, you got to pay him. And
so,
right, he's one of your assets. But you put yourself in a position now, like you're saying, Hunter, where you're going to be paying him you're basically going to be paying him Justin Jefferson money when you could have avoided it. And that's a ownership, that's a management blunder. Same with Micah Parsons. You're spot on.
I think, the Cowboys have been, every year is their year, fake contenders, but that's what the all in is. They're just fake all in. That's how they are every year.
It's crazy, right? It's crazy. It's from the top down at this point. Like,
moving into the New York Giants. Also, just to cap that off, the Dallas Cowboys were 12-5 last year, and they've had good records, but like I said, like I don't know if they're going to be 12-5 this year. This strikes me as more of a 10-7 type of year for them. Moving in to the New York Giants, they were 4-13 this year. Kind of moving into free agency, it was kind of interesting. I do like the Drew Lock deal. I think that the Giants are going to be more willing to play Lock earlier than they would be like another backup quarterback like a Tyrod Taylor, because I think Lock still presents that idea of maybe you can unlock something in there. Like he's got a big arm. Dable likes
no pun
arm.
intended.
Yeah, right. But trying to replace Saquon with Devin Singletary, and then I like the idea of Brian Burns, but in reality, we know that like the offense has really stunted this team. So while they got better on defense, well, I don't know. I mean, they lost Xavier McKinney, one of the best safeties in football. But I don't mind John Runyon. I don't mind Jermaine Illuminor. But I just think they didn't do enough on that O-line, in my opinion.
Well, honestly, that was going to be the first thing I addressed. So I'm glad we're going straight to it. Right. Look, I think a lot of Giants fans, and again, I understand, right? Like when you're a fan of the team, you're going to take the positives of the situation as opposed to just hammering the negatives. I don't blame you, right? But I think way too many Giants fans are kind of on this camp now. Like, dude, we got John Runyon. Like, what do you mean? Like, the O-line is making a big improvement. And like you just said, Jermaine Eleanor. Okay, but here's the problem with that is that those Jermaine and John are both two players that are, the way I view it, that's good depth. I don't want either of them to be like, nah, I'll give Jermaine Eleanor more of a pass. We'll give Jermaine, he played pretty good ball last year. But John Runyon, that's more like, that's good depth. But if that's my starter,
he's really reliable
for the whole season.
I will say that, like, Runyon is really reliable. I will say this about him, though. I get what you're saying. I think it's more of the fact that Runyon is now your second best lineman.
Well, yeah, pretty much, right? It's either him or Jermaine Eleanor, and exactly that's what I was going to get to next. Is John Michael Schmitz coming off of just call it for what it is again. He's a rookie. He can improve. It's not anything against him personally, but he had a really, really, really bad rookie year, right? Really bad, probably the worst center in the league last year. And then along with the right tackle, running mate over here, we got Evan Neal, right? And the big problem with Evan Neal is coming off that second season after having a really bad rookie season. He had arguably an even worse sophomore season. So now we're in a make or break where it's like, if Evan Neal doesn't end up having a good year, we wasted our first round pick in 2022. And this O-line is so far from being even a serviceable line. If everything I just listed happens, Hunter, I think that there's so much to be redone. Where do you even go from there? And I think Giants fans would agree. They're in a very, very unique situation where, like, you either are going to like somehow walk away with the end of this season, like re-signing Daniel Jones and like moving forward with this regime in somewhat of a direction, or it's literally just going to be like, yeah, this entire Giants team is going to be like re-picked apart. And like, we're only going to hold on to very, very small number of assets because a full blown rebuild has to happen. And there's really it's going to be one or the other. And I think you'd lean very much towards like, it looks like the Giants are getting really close to a massive rebuild. They just haven't all the way committed yet, even though they've kind of been like rebuilding already, but it's not like a really serious one. Does that make sense? Like, do you get what I'm trying to say here?
I get what you're saying. I think they have been a team that hasn't wanted to like pull the plug. And honestly, that season where they made the playoffs and won a playoff game was probably the worst thing that could have happened for them because they were like, oh, well, we don't need to do that much. And in reality, they just got really lucky. I think after watching like the Hard Knocks and kind of seeing like the decisions that they made, I feel like they're a lot more confident on their decisions than they really should be, says the guy talking about a general manager in the NFL. But I think I think generally people believe that the Giants aren't as good as they think they are. Like,
well, no. And here's what I want to say to that point, Hunter, because that was hilarious. But there is some there is very seriously some validity in it. And here's where I really wanted to bring up, because I was going to find a way to bring this up in here, and you actually made it seamless for me, so I appreciate you. You know, in the most recent episode of Hard Knocks, where Mara was talking about losing Saquon, and if they lost Saquon, he was going to lose sleep, right? Well, I know you peeped the same thing I peeped, where he was saying that the reason he was going to lose sleep was not because, yeah, he loves Saquon and he loves the production Saquon brings. It was because, quote unquote, Saquon's our most popular player, aka Saquon makes me the most money in jersey sales. So it's already not, in my opinion, a good sign when the owner is more concerned about selling jerseys than they are building a good roster. Because to your point, if you're a logical football fan, you can conduct from looking at this roster that, yeah, Brian Dable might be able to make them rise above their expectations, but this is not a championship football roster. And back to the theme of the show, Hunter, if you're not the champion, you're just the same as the loser. So if you're the Giants and you put together this roster thinking you're going to go compete for a championship, why? I guess is the only thing I can even say at that point. So I think, the Giants are in a unique situation. Daniel Jones has a lot to prove this year. And I think Brian Daboll, more than anything, got put into a really, really shitty situation. We're going to learn a lot about Brian Daboll this year, and we're going to learn a lot about Daniel Jones this year. And in between that, I feel like we're going to get to relearn a lot of what we already know, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see the next episode where they kind of get into the draft, because I think they were kind of alluding to that they were really close to a trade to move up and grab a quarterback, which to me is really annoying, because I know they've taken this stance like Daniel Jones, our quarterback, but like everything they do, like all their moves just indicate that they're really not confident in him. And giving him that extension was such a horrible idea. I think the issue is they're going to try this out. Like, I think if the Giants have another bad year, they may fire Joe Shane. I think they'll probably keep Daboll. But it just felt like Shane put all his eggs in the Daniel Jones basket, and it didn't work out like everyone thought it would. And they go out, they don't get a quarterback, so they go get a weapon for Daniel Jones, which in my opinion I understand, because the next pick, you can go and get next draft you can go and get a quarterback, and he's already got a weapon there. But when you watch that episode of Hard Knocks where they're interviewing Odunze, they're interviewing Marv, they're interviewing Neighbors, you could kind of tell that Daboll was so locked in Neighbors, and he just couldn't give like a wrong answer. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think Neighbors can be an explosive player. I think he can be great. I just don't necessarily love the decision making between Shane and Daboll. Again, says the guy in an apartment talking about NFL GMs and NFL coaches, but everyone's allowed to have their opinion. I guess my thing is the Giants just seem dysfunctional, and they don't I think they are way more confident in where they're at than a lot of people, in how a lot of people see them. So finally getting into the narrative, because there wasn't much on the draft day besides, I think Tyrone Tracy can contribute, Tyler Nubin to kind of replace Xavier McKinney, even though they're not going to be playing the exact same position. Is the Danny Dimes era over, or is it just starting?
No, yeah. I mean, that's really all there is to it. And I wanted to say also, because I didn't really touch on it too much, but I really wanted to include this. I actually am a really big fan. I really mean this. The more I think about it too, I'm a really big fan of this year's Giants draft class, but I want to say, I think it's very similar to what the Bills did with this year's draft class. Whereas you got a lot of, minus Malik Neighbors. Let me be completely clear. I think Malik Neighbors could potentially win Rookie of the Year. But besides Malik Neighbors, right, with Nubin, Andrew Phillips, Theo Johnson, Tyrone Tracy, Darius Masua, I think these are all guys that could actually be productive starters for them down the road. I just don't think you're going to see the blossom of it really this year, especially a guy like Theo Johnson. Like, these are guys that have a really high ceiling. I just don't know if you're going to be able to see them really get anywhere near the peak this year, but I get the vision of it long term, and I like the picks about the long term, right? The long term effect of it. But it's just about this year. Did the Giants get any better, if much better at all? Like, really, no. And that's kind of just objectively where we stand with them.
Moving in to the Philadelphia Eagles, our narrative for them is, are the Eagles back to being real Super Bowl contenders? Obviously, they go to the Super Bowl, they don't win, they come back next year. They were winning a lot, but it felt a lot like that year the Steelers were like undefeated, and we're like, well, the Steelers really they're not that good. Like, everyone could see it, but the record wasn't showing it. But there's some people that say you are what your record is. They trade for Kenny Pickett as a backup. They sign Saquon Barkley. They extend A.J. Brown. They extend Devonta Smith. They bring in Mekhi Becton. They extend Landon Dickerson. They bring in Bryce Huff. They kind of overhaul that linebacker room, signing Devin White. Hopefully he can, revamp his career, and then extend Jake Elliott and C.J. Gardner-Johnson. So overall, I think they had a really good free agency. I think the Eagles had probably one of the best off seasons in the NFL. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, what I really want to say to Eagles fans, and I mean this truly mean this. Look, I know you remember this too, Hunter. I remember a couple off seasons ago, there were truly Eagles fans that were very on the train of, hashtag fire Howie Roseman, right? I remember that was a thing, right? Howie Roseman's the reason that this team isn't a championship contender anymore. We need a new GM. I remember this vividly. I know I'm not tweaking on this one, but it's funny because truly you can see, and there's not a shadow of a doubt about it at this point. Howie Roseman cares far and away about winning and building a championship roster for his organization more than any other GM, right? Like Howie Roseman, I think here's why I say this too. I think if Howie was in charge of a lot of other teams, or I mean vice versa, if a lot of other people were in charge of the team as opposed to Howie, you would say to yourself, well, we're coming off the Super Bowl loss, it was really close, and last year was kind of just it was kind of a blunder. We'll make a couple moves and we'll be fine. We'll be right back to where we were. And you got guys like Howie Roseman that were like, oh, okay, we didn't get the job done, and we had a good year, but it was really because if we're not first, we're last. Fuck that, dude. We're scrapping down again. We're retooling again, and we're getting way better than we already were. Like, not a lot of GMs have the balls, have the confidence to pull that off. And Howie Roseman has been doing it consistently for the Eagles. If you're an Eagles fan, you got to be kissing at the feet of Howie Roseman at this point because the rosters that he keeps putting together for you guys are world-class championship rosters, and he's doing it by wheeling and dealing. It's not like he's just having good players fall into his lap. He's making all the right moves, and he very clearly, deeply cares about the Philadelphia Eagles. More than anything, Eagles fans, you guys have the best GM in the league because he is working his ass off for you guys. I mean, that's really the bottom line about the Eagles after this year. Howie Roseman is getting his hands dirty for this team constantly.
Well, I think, Dobbs, the funniest thing is we always talk about it. It's like sometimes these GMs, like, they just overthink it, right? Like, it's just one of these, like, dude, just make the easy decision. Like, make the choice that everyone knows that you should make. There's a reason when people are like, oh, this should happen, and then rumors start, and then it actually gets done. It's because it's one of those things where it's just like, yeah, this should probably just happen. It works for everybody. Howie Roseman is one of those GMs where he just goes, oh, this will work. This will make us better. Like, this works. This works. A.J. Brown extension, Devonta Smith extension, signing Saquon Barkley. He said the pendulum on how cheap running backs are has swung too far. It's time to get one of the best running backs in the league. And now the run game is going to be great. I think, not that it wasn't last year.
As if it already wasn't. I was saying it was
right. And then you go get Kellen Moore. You go get Vic Fangio. My only question really on this team, before we get to the draft, what does Nick Sirianni necessarily do for them if they don't make a deep run? Like, if you look at this team and go, what does Nick Sirianni do? Because you have an offensive coordinator, you have a defensive coordinator, and both those guys are completely capable of calling the offense and defense. Are you just a culture guy?
No, and I'm glad you brought this up, Hunter, because I actually been talking to a homie recently that is an Eagles fan, and I wanted to get, his interpretation of, like, what is your opinion on the whole Nick Sirianni situation, right? And he said, honestly, what I didn't expect him to say, but he was kind of in agreement with us, but also while being in disagreement at the same time, if that makes sense, where he was saying, like, look, I think realistically, if you're asking me, like, from an X's and O's perspective, right, like what Sirianni's doing for the team, realistically, he's really not doing a lot for us. Like, as far as an X's and O's coach, they could find so many better options. They really could. But the big thing on top of that is we're kind of in an era now, Dan Campbell being the biggest right example of it, is that you don't always need to have an X's and O's genius to have a good team. You just have to have a guy who can get the guys going to be the head coach, which is exactly what Nick Sirianni is. But if he stops getting those guys going and they're not that same fiery Eagles team, he was saying he has no problem with Sirianni being let out the door because we're at a point where we can see very clearly that this team was at its peak off of the coordinators, right? And now this year with the new coordinators, it was nothing like it was before. So if anything, Jonathan Gannon and Shane Steichen were very clearly, and as I'm very guilty of, I underrated the shit out of them, right? I very much didn't give them the value that they deserve. So all of a sudden, if it's another year of the same thing as last year, I think the Eagles, and like I said, right, Howie Roseman's not here to bullshit, Hunter. If Nick Sirianni pulls the same shit this year, I don't think Howie Roseman has any problem saying, look, I move quickly, right? This league moves quickly. My job was under fire a couple years ago because of motherfuckers like you. I'm not making the same mistake again. I'm making sure that I bring the right coach in. I'm making sure I retool everything I have to. Because I think if there's one GM that's not going to play with their coach, the one who already fired the Super Bowl winning coach, it's going to be Howie Roseman. So there's a lot of pressure on Nick Sirianni's shoulders this year to not only get them back to the Super Bowl, but to really get the job done, because this roster, the Lions roster, the Niners roster, they're basically all three the same in terms of quality, right? If you can't get us over the hump this year with what I've put in front of you, speaking from the perspective of Roseman, then we got to ask some questions, right?
Well, I think just quickly to touch on the draft, because we kind of overlooked it a little bit. You know, they had some issues in the secondary. They go get Quinyon Mitchell. They go get Cooper DeJean. And then they bring in two receivers, and Anais Smith and Johnny Wilson, who could contribute. And even Will Shipley at running back. So it is very, very interesting to think about what the Eagles can be at their height, because as long as Cam Jurgens can be 75% of Jason Kelce, their O-line's not going to really miss a beat, in my opinion. So the Eagles, I think, are back to being real Super Bowl contenders. Last year was kind of a little bit rough, in my opinion.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Truly, at this point, the bottom line is like the most pressure of anyone on this team far and away is Nick Sirianni.
Moving in to our last team in the NFC East, we have the Washington Commanders. And the narrative that we have for them is, did the Commanders set up Jaden Daniels for success? I don't know if they did, Dobbs, after looking at their offseason, honestly. I mean, I understand what they did in free agency. I think they did the right thing in terms of they raised the floor of their roster. And this is a completely new regime with, you know, Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury, Adam Peters at the GM role. And my main concern with the Commanders, it's got to be the O-line. So let's just touch on the draft real quick, because I think this is going to be just general narrative talk the whole time. You know, you go out and get Jerzon Newton, who I like. Obviously, he had the foot injury. Mikey Sanders still at corner, who is good. Ben Sinnott, who's pretty good. You got Brandon Coleman at TCU as a guard. And then you get Luke McCaffrey. And then you get, you know, 2 5s and a 7. So I like their draft, right? I like their drafts and who they're going to develop, right? But my concern is the line. I think there's not really, if you look at their line, besides Tyler Biadasz, is there anybody that you really like or feel confident in? And then also, with that being said, is there anybody on the roster that you're excited about developing? And my answer would be no when I'm talking about the offensive line.
No, and I think so. I would say, look, I think Sam Cosmi is also turning into productive starters. But to your point, him and Biadasz, outside of them, Nick Algoretti, great for him. Shouts to him. Basically getting paid off of playing really good in the Super Bowl, which is fine. Hey, like, look, he earned it for himself. I'm not knocking it at all. But you gave a solid bag to Allegretti off of basically a one-game performance. And then we don't know anything really about the tackle situation on the left side. And then on the right, you're not even necessarily sure who the starter is going to be at this point. And on the right side with Andrew Wiley, signed from the Chiefs a couple seasons ago, he's a fine starter, but he's not a game changer. And I think, again, as far as like rookie quarterbacks go, you could definitely do better with who you're putting around Jaden Daniels. The bottom line is, though, it's not even, I think I'll even one up you on this too. The big thing, Hunter, is I think it's a combination of the O-line in tangent with the fact that outside of Terry McLaurin, and might I add, Terry McLaurin coming off of, truthfully, honestly, at this point, probably the worst season of his career so far. Even though he's had a really good career, it wasn't like it was a bad year. Probably the worst year he's had personally, right? And obviously it was not all his fault. It's a lot of external circumstances and things that he can't control. But the bottom line is, I'm not a big, right, like this receiving core, are you a fan of it? Like, I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm a fan of the receiving core. I'm like I said, I'm certainly not going to sit here and act like I'm a fan of the O-line. And I think, let's just call it a buck. Are you a fan of the running back room either? I mean, I like Brian Thomas Jr. or Brian Robinson Jr. Austin Eckler is someone we used to like a lot. I mean, Chris Rodriguez Jr. showed us little moments last year, but you know, back to, if you're not first, you're last. And obviously the Commanders aren't going to be first this year, but the future of this team, where do we see them making that jump to be that super competitive team? Because I think what I always like to remind people too is about the Commanders, right? All their big free agent acquisitions this year. These are all guys that are already, if not 27, right, 28 years old, basically 29 years old, 30 years old. It's like, at what point is this team going to hit its Super Bowl window? And by the time it does, a lot of those guys that you just paid now are going to start to be getting older, less productive, generally speaking, right? So I think, and I think you agree with this. The problem with the Commanders is more just like, it's not like they didn't set Jaden Daniels up to have a somewhat productive rookie season. What I'm worried about is, did they set him up long term to have a championship window in this rookie season? And I think we can agree, as of right now, I can't say super confidently that's what the Commanders did.
Well, I don't know. I think I would be more concerned necessarily about the Super Bowl window and more about just getting, because I think the way the Commanders signed their guys and drafted their guys, they could set up for a Super Bowl window, right? But I don't necessarily know if they set him up year one to develop him. Like, I like Terry McLaurin, right? But like you said, I don't love the running back room. I don't love the wide receiver room outside of Terry. I think the running back room, it's not bad. Like, it's not one of the worst in the league. I'll say that. Like, I'm less concerned about that. But when it comes to O-line, especially when you had the issues of scrambling with open pockets in college at a high rate, and you have Cliff Kingsbury, who the jury, I feel like, is out on him on the hire, and it was very clear that Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury were not their first choices to be their OC, to be the head coach. So I think Jaden Daniels might not have a bad rookie year. Developing into a franchise quarterback, though, with the line and wide receiver room they have, I don't know. I think this is the story of a lot of bad teams who take quarterbacks high. See the Patriots in our last video. But at the end of the day, I feel like they could have gone out and did more for the offensive line, and that is my main gripe with the Commanders this offseason.
No, absolutely. And it's funny because I haven't even really thought about it at all until you're saying it. But again, I understand why, as opposed to the Patriots, that they're not from an optics standpoint. Like, when you bring in, well, actually, though, funny enough, really, I'm going to rephrase that. I'm taking it all back. Really, that's a question we should be asking ourselves, Hunter. Like, why are more people, and why are the Commanders, why is nobody really entertaining the idea that realistically the best thing for the Commanders and Jaden Daniels would really be to give him this whole season probably to just sit and digest, just like all the other young quarterbacks. I get it.
But he's not
year
young,
coming
though.
out.
Yeah,
and
like,
that's, I get it. I do. But I think I'll say, like, I think a lot of times we're looking at it the wrong way, to says, maybe as NFL fans as a whole. Like, maybe it doesn't even have to do with the age when you come out. I think more anything, it just has to do with, it doesn't really matter. Like, it's like the adjustment, whether you're 26 or whether you're 21, is going to be a world of change when you're used to playing with college athletes. You know what I mean? Like, I think if we knew that Jaden Daniels was going to be sitting this whole year, and he was going to just have a year where the Commanders were going to have another really bad record and develop more draft capital and have a more of a clear, right, vision for day one when Jaden Daniels is going to start, like, we could maybe really be a playoff team this year. So I think you would agree. It doesn't feel like that at all for the Commanders this year. Same way as it doesn't for the Patriots, which is why, as we always say, it makes so much sense that Drake May likely won't be starting. It's funny. Like, in theory, you could very well say the same thing about Jaden Daniels, and I know I'm with you. Yeah, he's much older, but I'm just throwing it out there because it's funny. Like, you can't tell me that they couldn't potentially, and Jaden Daniels, both benefit mutually very much from that happening.
So I think you could. I don't think they will. I think my main thing with the age,
definitely don't think they will.
I think my thing with the age is, I don't necessarily think like he's going to be 24 this year, right? I don't necessarily think that's the problem. I think quarterbacks now can play into their late 30s, right? So it's more important that you develop and get him developed instead of rooting him early on. My issue is Jaden Daniels wins a lot with his legs, and we know the legs don't last into those late 30s. So my thing is, if you can't develop him as a passer when he's younger, and he has to rely on his legs because he's running for his life from this line, especially with D lines like Dallas and Philly and even the Giants now. So my thing is that's 6 games a year that you're going to be playing against really good defensive lines. If he's got to run, he's not even going to develop as a passer because, outside of Terry McLaurin, his guys can't get open and he's got to run for his life. The fact that he will have to develop into a passer later in his career is not looking good to me, in my opinion.
No, that's a great point.
Strictly
I
off
wasn't really thinking about
thought
that
experiment. Thought experiment. Strictly off a thought experiment.
But it's a great point, and I think you'd agree. It almost even plays into what I was saying too. Like even though he's older, if he was to, which they're not going to. I want to be clear, Commanders fans. I know NFL fans. I know it's not going to happen. I'm just throwing out the idea because nobody's been talking about it. We're like, to your point, we've been saying, Hunter, you can't tell me it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. You can't tell me it would even be potentially a bad thing. It probably would be a good thing long term. It's just that the optics are different for the Commanders than they are for the Patriots for whatever reason right now from like the average NFL fan. But I do think genuinely it's a conversation that it's definitely not far off from being something that should be thought about, but it really hasn't been. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I will agree with you on that. I don't think I've ever really heard people talk about that. I think it really has to do with the fact that May is so young, and for some reason, I think people think the Patriots roster is like much worse than the Commanders. But I think I think from a player, I think you have a better like. I don't know. I think the Patriots have a better roster. I think they do.
I'm saying that's where it's so funny. Like you look across the roster for the Commanders, and there's few guys you could pick out that are like, yeah, he's a young stud. But outside of those few guys, like genuinely 4 or 5 guys, you're looking at either aging like veterans that have had productive careers, but they're aging, or guys that are just young that have never even gotten close to reaching their potential and that might not even get close to reaching their potential. And if that's our median point as a roster, to what you're saying, Hunter, are they that much better, if even better at all, than the Patriots? I'm going to just leave it at that, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting year. I think Jaden Daniels will fare pretty well his rookie year. I think his sophomore year is going to be very telling. But that should wrap up our season team previews for the NFC East. Dobbs, do you have any final thoughts?
How about final thoughts is that the NFC East is always a bloodbath, always fun to watch. I hope it's more of the same this year.
Well, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, if you don't know ball and want to know ball, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, let us know in the comments what you think the narratives for each team in the NFC East will be. As always, have a great rest of your night.